Hello, everyone. I'm Cheryl Heilman, and I'm from the North Baltimore Public Library. I'd like to welcome everyone here today, and our special speaker is Scott Gross from the Wood County Museum, and we'd like to thank the Wood County Museum for sharing this sessions with us. Today, we're going to be talking about Frank Schreiber, who lived most of his life in Moline, Ohio. He was born in 1861, way back when, and had a very interesting life. Marissa is here to welcome us as well from the Wood County Museum, so we'll switch to her.
Hi, I'm Marissa. I'm the Marketing and Events Coordinator for the Wood County Museum. We just like to thank everyone today for tuning in, and that I'd just like to give a special shout out to our sponsors of our virtual history series, Edwin and Irma Wolf and Lynn and Betty Wineland. Without that support, we are so thankful for that. And to our many T-card holders as well for our T-series. These virtual history series kind of came out as a way to still offer that educational component of those programs, even though we weren't able to host our T-series this year. But we're looking forward to bringing our T-series back next year. So if you're interested in that, just keep an eye out here. In about a month, we'll be launching that information. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Scott for our program this afternoon.
All right, well, thank you very much. So this is the second time I've made a presentation under this format. And today I would like to talk about Frank Schreiber. And the more research I did on Frank, the more interesting the story became. And so I thought it developed into a nice presentation for this group. So I'm going to share my screen because I have a PowerPoint presentation prepared. So, okay, how's that? Can you see the screen?
Yep, you're good to go.
All right, well, technology. Thanks for bearing with us on that, folks. Yeah, with all the different platforms for this style meeting, it's kind of a challenge. So, but here we are. Now we're up and running. Okay, so today I'm going to make a presentation on Frank Schreiber. And there's a number of things that Frank Schreiber was known for. One of them being that he was one of the Wood County Infirmary directors. So that is kind of the direct tie for this presentation. But for those of you familiar with Lake Township, familiar with Moline, he really had quite the past there as well. I need to see about minimizing the screen. There we go. Okay, so in November, okay, that's going to work better for me. Okay, so in November of 1894, Frank ran for the Infirmary Director on the Republican ticket. And so out of the Wood County Sentinel and Gazette, here was a little announcement of who all of the people for the Republican Party were on that specific election. And so Frank was elected to be the Infirmary Director, one of 3 directors that served at the time. And he actually served for a total of 6 years at this post. So who was Frank Schreiber? Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background. The first part being that Frank Schreiber was actually my 2 times great uncle. But in addition to being my 2 times great uncle, he was my double 2 times great uncle. And what do I mean by that? Well, let me explain. First, let me start with my great-grandparents. My great-grandparents were Amelia Schreiber Gross and Emanuel Gross. Amelia was the half-sister of Frank. So when Amelia and Emanuel got married, that made Frank my 2 times great uncle. But to complicate matters, Emanuel had a sister, Elizabeth, and Elizabeth married Frank Schreiber. So in a sense, that makes he makes Frank my double great uncle. So things get confusing sometimes when you're looking at family trees, and this is one of those instances. So I want to start a little bit from the beginning with Frank. Frank was born in 1861 to Gottlieb and Mary Ann Schreiber, and he grew up on the family farm in Oregon Township in Lucas County. The farm was actually located at about the area where 280 and Navarre Avenue exit come together. It was out in that part of the Toledo area. Notice on here that Gottlieb and Mary Ann spelled their name with an E. I don't know why, but Frank Schreiber was the only descendant of this family that dropped the E from the spelling. He always spelled his name Schriber. So no one knows why exactly, but that's just kind of what he did. Maybe it was more of a phonetic spelling that was easier for when he was running a business or something. But continuing on, Frank had kind of a tragic childhood in a sense. At the age of 3 years old in 1865, his mother passed away. And she was only 24 years old at the time. Now, I haven't found exactly what was her cause of death. Wouldn't be surprised if it was consumption or tuberculosis, something along that line. Frank's father did remarry, and from the second wife, that's where the half-sister Amelia came in. But then in 1876, Frank's father died in a farm accident. And according to family history records, the farm accident was basically a team of horses with a load of grain ran away, and Frank's father fell from the wagon and was run over. So that is kind of from the archives of the family history. Frank and his sister, after that point in time, they did have various family members, aunt and uncles that were named legal guardians until they became adults. At the age of 16 years old in 1878, Frank left home. He left Lucas County, Oregon Township, and he actually toured about the country working as a railroad contractor. He did leave with his uncle, and it seems like they worked on installing railroad tracks across the nation. I find it kind of interesting and amazing that someone at that young of age would go off on such an adventure. Some other statistics here. Some quick facts about Frank. In 1882, he moved to his farm in Moline. So he was a farmer for 4 years. By 1886, he operated a general store. In 1889, he was the postmaster. In 1890, he sold farm implements. 1892, bought and shipped grain and coal. 1895, elected as Infirmary Director. 1902, a railroad station agent. 1908, Deputy Oil Inspector. 1910, District Foreman for the Continental Sugar Company. And then by 1914, opened an automobile business. Wow. And these are just a few things. I did find even a few other areas of interest that he was able to, for opportunities and business adventures, but these were kind of some of the main ones. He really did a lot. And I wonder, did he just kind of have an eye for what ways might be a way for himself to make a living? You know, it's just such a wide and varied career was really interesting. Now, I'd like to point out on here that I do have some family archives, photos, and information that I use for this presentation. I do have at my access the Beers biographical sketch that was put together in the late 1800s. But I would like to make a little announcement here as far as I do a lot of my research on the library's website where you can search local newspapers that are scanned in and digitized. If you're doing research And you can go into the websites for the library and you can type in a key name like Frank Schreiber, and it will pull up every single article that that name pops up. And especially during the pandemic, I would spend a lot of time searching newspaper articles by keywords from the comfort of my home. So it's a great tool if you're wanting to see if you can uncover some information about family members or events or the town you grew up in. It's a tremendous tool that is available for us to do research. Okay, so moving on. Frank settled in Moline on land that he inherited from his maternal grandfather. And so you can see here, Frank Schreiber, this was the plot of land that he owned. In today, this is Moline Martin Road, and the north-south road here is East Broadway. So this is really the heart of Moline today. And I didn't even know it at the time when I was doing some of this research. The house that I grew up in Moline was actually on Frank Schreiber's original farmstead, but it had been sold off at that point. So I found that kind of interesting. You'll notice this little spot right here, this little square, and it says Evangelical CH for church. There's a point in time in which Frank donates land, the corner, to the church. And that's where the church for the Moline United Methodist Church was located. So that's what that little spot is on here. After 4 years of farming, though, I think Frank must have got the idea that there was another way to make a living. So he kept his farm, he rented it out, and in 1886, he went into the business of merchandising. And so this was an existing general store located on East Broadway, with Mr. Rudolph having started it. And so Frank went into partnership with Mr. Rudolph with this specific general store. By 1888, he bought the store, and along with his sister Amelia, they operated this store. It was kind of a short-lived adventure, though, that by 1890, he had sold it to B.F. Lusher. And this is a photo of the store as it appeared in 1914 from the Lake Township, the history of Lake Township. In 1890, I found an article in the Wood County Sentinel and Gazette that reported that Frank Schreiber was building a new house on his farm and will sell the McCormick binders and mowers for the next season. And so Frank must have found a very profitable business of selling farm implements to all the local farmers. I had found some subsequent reports in the newspapers, 1893. F.J. Schreiber is doing a rushing business selling binders, mowers, and buggies. F.J. Schreiber, our implement agent, reports selling 42 buggies this summer. And then I found this last one on 1896. Infirmary Director F.J. Schreiber of Moline sells the Yale bicycle, the best grade of buggies, farm implements, and steel windmills. So I will tell you at this point in time in my research, I found a lot of these short little comments or parts were made, especially if it was talking about what was happening in Moline or whatever. But Frank Schreiber's name came up a lot over the years. And I have a feeling that Frank must have befriended a reporter at the paper and was able to get a lot of little comments, to promote himself and his businesses in the newspapers. That's about all I can figure, because there were a lot of these kind of comments that came up all the time. So by 1894, Frank was running for the elected position of the Infirmary Director. And you probably can read this on the screen. I realize it's a little blurry. It's a snapshot taken from the digital archives. I want to just read a couple of parts of it, though. The very first part, Frank Schreiber was born in Oregon Township, just over the line in Lucas County, and therefore came as near being web-footed as any citizen not actually born on Wood County soil. I'm not exactly sure what that implies, but it was kind of an interesting opening statement about, being near as web-footed as anybody. The last part was the final paragraph, which this description. Frank Schreiber is a whole-souled fellow, honest as the day is long, a worker in the party ranks, quiet and unobtrusive in demeanor, but with a faculty to work and a willingness to do what is right by all men. That will make him a valuable acquisition to the infirmary board. So really quite an interesting endorsement and, campaign pledge here, or information for the voters to make their decision. And in fact, then he did occupy this position for 2 years or for 6 years, and worked during that time with Edwin Farmer. So within the some of the articles pertaining during the time period of being the director. Wait, let me go back here. Okay, yeah, I forgot. The one other part here I wanted to mention was that the infirmary directors met twice a month with the superintendent, which was Edwin Farmer, and they would review monthly financials. They would make inspections at the infirmary, looking at conditions of the physical buildings, conditions of the residents, and just, kind of an overall third-party set of eyes to take a look at the infirmary and how things were, the day-to-day operations of it. So that was part of his role. And there's an awful lot of infirmary records, with the monthly meetings that Frank attended with the other directors and with Edwin Farmer. But there were some additional responsibilities. The directors also assisted domestic issues within the townships that they were responsible for. And so I found a few, hold on here a minute. I found a few articles in the paper with some of the different things that Frank might have encountered during his time. And so like on this one on 1895, William Shire of Perrysburg Township, age 56, was taken to the infirmary on Wednesday by Director F.J. Schriber. The old man was partially disabled, in a partially disabled condition, having frozen his feet and thereby losing 2 toes during the recent severe weather. There was another similar type incident here where Frank Schreiber was in town at Bowling Green. He had brought an old gentleman named Henry O. Smith to the county infirmary. So, Frank again was, kind of a liaison between the township and the infirmary. 1899, Director F.J. Schreiber brought an aged man to the infirmary from Millbury in a deplorable condition. He was about 60 years old and was out of doors about all of the Wednesday night. He was found, his feet, hands, and face were badly frozen. It was necessary to cut his boots off of his feet. It is thought that he had wandered away from the Lucas County Infirmary. So, definitely being an infirmary director, there was more things involved in just the monthly meetings at the facilities themselves. The last one that I found was in 1899, and I'll read this one to you. One of the most peculiar cases of destitution that has occurred for some time was brought to notice of the infirmary directors last Sunday. Trustee Amos Coy of Ross Township notified Infirmary Director Frank Schreiber that there had been a man in a shock of corn on the D. Gilbert farm for 3 days. An investigation proved that the fellow had been lying there through all the rain of Friday and Saturday nights with scarcely anything to cover him. He had no shirt and little clothing. He was almost dead when found. He was taken into a wagon and driven to East Toledo, from where he was brought to Bowling Green and the infirmary. The fellow claims that he belongs in Nebraska and his name is Charlie Dye. Just, you know, a lot of different cases, some life-threatening, some sad, just a lot of things that would happen in the township that would be kind of brought to the attention of the infirmary director. After his time as infirmary director, he had a number of other different positions, but one that I found of interest, especially in this time frame with the advent of the automobile, you know, Frank Schreiber became a deputy inspector. And a deputy inspector, in 1908, Ohio passed legislation to inspect oil, gasoline, and naphtha, which was shipped into the state. Companies had to pay fees to the state for these products received. And then the purpose of the state inspector, this office was created, and it had deputy inspectors. I think it was assuring the volume of product that was being shipped, and it might have even been trying to look at the quality of the product. And then according to records from this state inspector office, from June to December of 1908, for example, Frank inspected over 11,000 barrels of product from across the townships that he was in charge of and the counties that he was in charge from. So it's kind of an interesting snapshot of not only Frank's career, but even things happening in Ohio as the beginning of the era of the automobile. And also in 1908, Frank became connected with the Continental Sugar Company. And so the Continental Sugar Company did have an office in Toledo, but it also had the refining facility in Fremont, Ohio. And the idea between the Continental Sugar Company was to encourage farmers locally to plant sugar beets in which that they would refine into sugar. And so Frank had a number of positions within the Continental Sugar Company, starting out as a regional field man and moved his way up through district foreman and agriculturalist. And so he would also go out and canvass farmers and encourage farmers to plant sugar beets, to buy the implements necessary to plant and harvest sugar beets, and demonstrate that it was a profitable crop to grow and sell. And even at this time, Moline had a beet dump that operated along the railroad tracks. And this was actually, looking at this picture, was just about across the road from Emanuel Gross's farm. And I found it interesting that they would, you know, pile the beets along the road, but the idea of the beet dump was that it weighed beets and then loaded them into train cars to haul likely to Fremont for processing. And the weighing station was then how the farmers were paid. Now, I don't know if Frank specifically had anything to do with the construction of the beet dump in Moline. I have not found anything to say that he had a hand in where it was located at, but I would have to believe he probably did. But this was in operation in Moline for quite some time, actually. By 1914, Frank started business selling automobiles in Moline. And I found this ad, you know, and you think about 1914, you know, that's a pretty early time in the era of the automobile. So Frank was kind of on the cutting edge of selling automobiles. And the little article in the newspaper in the Daily Sentinel said, Frank Schreiber doing well. Frank Schreiber of Moline was in the city Friday. Frank is selling Maxwell, Studebaker, Page, and Metz automobiles now and is meeting with much success. He has converted the old evangelical church at Moline into a splendid garage. And this advertisement I found in the Sentinel, and it was actually advertising the Saxon motor car. And this is the only advertisement that I ever found that Frank ran in the paper supporting his business. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but at least I found one specific advertisement to give us something to look at here. So what about this converting the church into a sales and repair shop? Have you ever heard of such a thing? Well, there's a little bit of a story behind this. So earlier in the presentation, I pointed out to you that that in 1882 was the actual year that Frank deeded the corner of the property to the church. And at that time, the church built a wood-framed structure on the property. By 1914, the church had grown so much that they had outgrown their building. And so Frank worked with the church and had the original wood frame structure moved up East Broadway and placed on his property, enabling the church to then build the bigger brick church. Once he had the building in place, he installed a large sliding door on it that allowed the cars to be able to brought in and out, and reconfigured the building into his shop. And I have wondered as I went through this, it's like, you know, if Frank had been selling buggies and farm implements, mowers and binders and all these kind of things to the farmers, I wonder if his client base that he had built up from selling all of these products made it a natural fit for him to become a salesperson for automobiles. It may have been a lot of the same client base. And so here was what Frank's business looked like on East Broadway. And the building is actually still there. It is now, it housed a barbershop and beauty salon in the first floor for a long time and apartments on the upper floor. But the building is still there. And at the time though, Frank had the big sliding doors on the front. Could bring cars in and out, and he operated service and sales out of this facility. And I look at this sign and I think, what a big sign on the front of your business for being located so closely to the road itself. This picture was taken in 1915. In the photo, from left to right, there is a gentleman named Mr. Williams. Then it's Frank Schreiber leaning up against the car, one of the cars as well. And then the other person in the picture in the doorway was Sid Baker, who was actually the mechanic. And then Mrs. Williams was in the picture, and the last one is unknown. I'm not sure the Williams connection to the business, but Frank Schreiber employed Sid Baker to be the repair person. The cars in the photo, the two cars on the left are 1915 Overland Model 80 touring cars, and the photo on the car on the right is a 1914 Overland Model 79 touring car. And keep in mind, the Overland product was built in Toledo, so it kind of made sense that maybe at this point, Frank would be selling products that were readily available nearby. I just have a picture of, you saw the picture initially of Frank in his younger days. And then in 1914, this is an image of Frank that I'd found in the newspaper. So gives you an idea of what he was looking at like at this point in time in his career. And you know, when I do research on my hometown of Moline, I always think about you know, what the perfect little town it was and that it had been perfect for so long. And you know, you think nostalgically about where you grew up at. But in reality, you know, there was a lot of different things that went on even in such a small town. And interestingly, we had crime in Moline, and that was something I had never thought about, even back during Frank's time. So I found a few articles that I thought were kind of interesting. And this first article I found in 1908 in the Daily Sentinel. On Friday night, some night prowlers tried to break into the home or into the residence of F.J. Schreiber during his absence from home. Mrs. Schreiber heard them and shot through the window, scaring them away. Then phoned her nearest neighbor, and by the time they had arrived, they had made good with their escape. And this just kind of tickled me to think of, Elizabeth Gross Schreiber taking the 12 gauge shotgun or whatever she had on handy and shooting through the window and scaring the people away. That one kind of was interesting to me. But then there were also robberies at the garage. I found a couple of different instances, and this first one was in 1915, and Sheriff Skibby was called to Moline Sunday following the theft Saturday night of 6 casings, which were tires, and 7 inner auto tubes of Frank Schreiber's garage. Later, John Ish found casings along the roadside, and in the morning, 4 more casings were found in the ditch near the garage. Eventually, 3 people were arrested in association to this robbery. And interestingly, they even brought bloodhounds from Toledo to help solve the case. And one of the other ones that I found that was kind of along the same line, Sheriff Skibby and both deputies motored to Moline, where Frank Schreiber's garage had been burglarized. Mr. Schreiber with Mr. Taylor and Mr. Baker had gone to the lake early that day and had asked a neighbor to look after his garage, a public one. At 2 a.m., the neighbor saw 3 men in the garage, but supposed it was travelers getting ready for an early start. Later, it was discovered that 5 casings had been stolen. So it seems like the item to steal of choice was tires. And yeah, it's kind of funny though, you entrust the neighbor to watch after the garage. And then when something's happening, they figured it's probably something that's okay. One of the last positions that I found from Frank Schreiber was a position that he was offered as a deputy oil collector. Deputy revenue collector. I do not, and this was a position through the Internal Revenue Service, but it does not seem that Frank ever filled this role. And it was partially due to a series of accidents and other bad cases. So I found in the paper in 1922, Frank Schreiber, who succeeds E.J. Reardon as Deputy Collector of the Internal Revenue, the first of the new year, is recovering nicely at home in Moline with a broken wrist, which came from the official cranking his automobile 2 weeks ago last Tuesday. He'd been confined to home until the last few days with the injured wrist and a bad cold in his throat. So it's kind of interesting. You don't think about going out there and having to crank your car in the morning, but if it backfires and comes back on you, it could break your wrist, as it did for Frank. And then the last little article here, Schreiber hit hard. Frank J. Schreiber, the Moline garage man, was in town Friday. He thinks he has got hit about as hard as anyone this year. First, he broke his wrist while cranking his machine. Then his collarbone was broken in an auto accident. Then the other day, his Oldsmobile truck took fire and burned up. So yes, it definitely was not a good time at that period for Frank. So by 1925, on August 28th, Frank Schreiber passed away at the age of 63 years old. So it's a relatively young age, really. But I still look back at this, period of time, in all the research and different things that I found in the newspaper articles. He really had an interesting and diverse career. I have found at least 12 vocations or opportunities that Frank had during his career. And some of them that I hadn't highlighted in this presentation, including that he was the postmaster, which was located at the general store in Moline. He was a Toledo and Ohio Central Railroad Station agent, that there was a train stop in Moline. He was a member of the Wood County Board of Elections, and he was even a bus driver for Lake Schools for a time. So though, there was so many things that I found, and there were some things that I'm sure there were things that are in addition to this that I simply didn't find. So the more I researched about Frank, the more fascinating I found his story became. And I'd like to think about the fact that, you know, he lost his mother when he was 3 years old, and he lost his father when he was 14 years old. And so here you are, 14 years old, and you may have some aunts and uncles to look after you. But, you know, that's really a devastating thing for such a young person. And yet he overcame these losses and went on to become a very successful individual. And not only was he successful personally, but it made him a very enterprising individual who clearly had made a positive contribution to the growth of and business structure of Moline at the time, but he also made positive contributions to Wood County as well. And, you know, where Frank and Elizabeth had no children and he died so early, when I was growing up, we knew of Frank Schreiber. We knew very little about him. You know, his story was already kind of lost to the ages. And so, excuse me, by doing this research, I kind of feel like I've recaptured his story a little bit, or at least a little bit more about what his life was like. And so it's a story that I'm kind of glad I was able to recapture and bring it back from being lost in the ages. So that is my presentation. I would like to thank Edwin and Irma Wolf and Lynn and Betty Wineland for being supporters of this virtual history presentation. And as well, you know, we also have so many generous T-card season holders that also are in support of this program as well. So I will stop sharing my screen. And that is my presentation from today. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
No comments?
Well, that was very interesting. And if you think about it, I'm sure there are many, many stories out there that have been lost to the ages that we just need to investigate a little bit more. But Frank's story was very interesting. So thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank
Yes,
you for sharing.
it certainly was.
I have a comment, not really a question, a comment. I was the pastor at the Church, United Methodist Church in Moline for 6 years, from 86 to 92, and knew some of the Grace Gross. Who was she, your aunt, or? Oh, was Grace your aunt, or how was she related to you, Scott?
So Grace was my grandmother.
Your grandmother. Okay. All right.
All right.
She was a great, and Ruth, of course, Chuck and Ruth, and Linda Ish was the other name that came up in the presentation, the Ishes.
Yeah.
We didn't know her husband. He was gone before we got there, but she was quite a character.
She was.
And so Chuck and Ruth were also my my great aunt and uncle.
Okay. All right. All right. Yeah. They were all great people.
Yeah. From the Wood County Genealogy Society, I'm going to be working on a presentation which would be in person for that organization in January. That is about my grandfather, Frank Gross, and his biplane days. So that would be something that is another kind of colorful topic that I've researched, and a fun
Yeah.
story as well. So.
Cool.
Any other comments or questions?
All righty, well, if there's no more comments or questions, I just want to thank everyone again for tuning in today on behalf of the Wood County Museum. I know Cheryl and her team over at the library will get this uploaded to the North Baltimore Public Library YouTube page. And we'll make sure to reshare that link once it's up on our social pages, to put it out there in case anyone missed anything, or if you know someone who wasn't able to make it, that you could share it with them. So
We will.
All right.
Thank you.
thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Apologies
thank you,
again.
Scott.
I will review my screen sharing skills.
It all worked out.
Thank you for your patience.
Alrighty, have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.